totally off topic from this. It was on social stratification and minorities. And this lecture, the topic I was given was social justice and ethics. Now, it's been a while since I've taught undergrad. I only teach graduate students. So, I may use jargon you may not understand. Write them down. I'll speak for about 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll leave the rest for questions and answers, okay? And we will, on these paper cards, do me a favor. On one side, write down what you learned from my lecture. On the other side, write down what you gathered from the lecture and what you want to do with what you gathered from my lecture, okay? So I'll pass them around. Or you can pass them around. Just take one.
Following his lecture, there will be a survey also, so don't just dump it in.
Okay, before I get started, I speak in the name of my ancestors, the father of my country, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, my grandparents, Saïla and Mocombe, and the goddess of my country. Anyway, my name is Dr. Mocombe, Paul Mocombe. My background is in philosophy and sociology. I was trained as a structural Marxist and a phenomenologist. Phenomenology is a branch of philosophy. It deals with consciousness and the things of consciousness. I am also trained as a sociologist. So I have degrees in sociology and comparative studies, which is philosophy and sociology combined. So tonight's lecture will deal with social justice and ethics. Now, I will not deal with the technical terms. I won't go deeply into the technical terms, but I will have to use some technical terms just because of the nature of the beast. But I won't go into the different schools of the ethical schools. I will deal with basically one major ethical school, which is classical liberalism. And from there we'll go. And I will do this lecture by way of a historical example. So I'm going to use this historical example to make philosophy concrete. It's like reading Hegel. Hegel is abstract. If you ever try to read philosophy, Hegel, that's one of the worst books you can pick up. But reading Hegel's phenomenology of history is easy to read because he uses concrete examples to make his points. Now, the example I'm going to use is the Haitian Revolution. And I use the Haitian Revolution because the dispensation of time parallel what we're experiencing now contemporarily. At the beginning of the Haitian Revolution in 1791, what is juxtaposed are two technically liberal philosophies, mercantile liberal economic philosophies, liberalism and free trade. Everybody knows who the father of free trade capitalism is, right? Adam Smith. Adam Smith writes his book, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776. So at the dawn of this conflict, because right now, what we're experiencing in contemporary American globalization is this juxtaposition between what we call protectionism and what we call the free trade, globalization, capitalist of the time. So I will use the Haitian Revolution, not only to parallel what's going on now, but to also try to understand what would social justice appear like in American contemporary society. Because during the Haitian Revolution, it's a struggle not only against slavery, but it's also a struggle against capitalism. And what did the revolutionary leaders envision social justice? When I say the revolutionary leaders, I'm talking about the slaves themselves, the African slaves on the island. How did they envision social justice and ethics? So, whenever we talk about ethics at the beginning of philosophy, we're dealing with two particular topics. We're dealing with something called ontology. Ontology, metaphysics, and epistemology.
You will see all these words again. You might want to take notes.
So we're dealing with ontology, metaphysics, epistemology. Ontology refers to being. What is it? What is out there? You're either what constitutes existence. What what constitutes being, or what is there to know. Is everything ideas, or is everything material? I am what's called a materialist. You could be an idealist. Plato was an idealist. He has his world of forms, etc. So everything is ideas. I believe everything is material. Metaphysics simply means beyond physics. What is there out there? What is the nature of being? What does it mean to be? As a phenomenologist, I approach metaphysics as well as epistemology as the study of knowledge. What is there to know? And how do we know what is there to know? So it's two things. Knowing that and knowing how. How do I know what I know? When we're dealing with ethics, ethics is dealing with how are we to live in the world? But how should I be in the world? To answer that question, so the question is asking practical consciousness, practical reasoning, and the application of what I know to action. How should I interact with you? To answer that question, you have to have an ontology, you have to have a metaphysics, and you have to have an epistemology. So you just don't say, you shouldn't, I'm a little out there, you shouldn't rape little boys. Why not? Or it's just wrong. Why is it wrong? So as philosophers, we systematically try to deduce ethical behavior or ethical knowledge in the world. System is not, oh, this is my opinion. We do have a philosophical school where, yes, this is my belief. It's called the emotive school. So you have to have an ontology, a metaphysics, and epistemology. In classical liberalism, which would constitute Western society, they would begin, all of them, but by all of them I mean John Locke, David Hume, Spinoza, and I'm using who we call the Enlightenment philosophy, because it is out of the Enlightenment that we get these classical liberal philosophers who would constitute American society, the ideas behind American society. So, in Western epistemology, you have two schools of thought. You have what's called the empiricists, and you have the rationalists. You have Locke, Hume, Hume, and Berkeley. The rationalists, you have Descartes. We all know cohesive ergo sum. We have Descartes, we have Spinoza, Leibniz, and Kant. Locke will introduce this notion that we are all blank slates. So basically, what we know epistemologically, how we know, is empirical. Everything that we know is in the mind, and we know what we know from experience. These are your empiricists. Hume will debate Locke. Berkeley will say all there is are ideas. Ideas that we get from sense impression. The rationalists will critique the empiricists and say, no, all we have are ideas. In fact, I don't even have to go out and do research. I don't have to do empirical research. I'm bastardizing, so excuse me for a minute. We don't even have to do empirical research. In fact, Descartes says, I could spin the world out of my own mind. All the knowledge of the world out of my own mind. But then there comes a problem, because both of these positions lead to a contradiction. If everything is sense experience, sense impression, why is it that we have a variety of ideas and experiences? If one true knowledge comes from sense experience, why don't we share the same ideas about certain things? In fact, Hume is problematic because he says, based on sense experience, I can't even prove causality. I can't even say A causes B. In fact, there's not even a self according to Hume. You don't exist as a self. That's a product of your mind. Not only do the empiricists reach that conclusion, the rationalists reach that same conclusion essentially. Nothing is real but my ideas. So how can two different philosophies end up with the same conclusion? Immanuel Kant will synthesize the two. He will synthesize the two in his Critique of Pure Reason. He will say the reason is the mind imposes the structure that we see in reality. The two schools of thought did not take into account what Kant calls the categories of the mind, the form of the understanding and the form of sensibility. It's not that as we get information from the world, from the phenomenal world, it's the nature of reality as such. He makes a distinction between noumena and phenomena. Phenomena is what you experience, what you get through your sense impression. Noumena is how the things are in and of themselves. Kant argues we cannot know how things are in and of themselves. All we can ever have access is phenomena. And then the brain, the mind, and our senses imposes a structure to reality. Now he can come up with a universal structure. Why can Kant come up with a universal structure that we can base our science and our ontology and our metaphysics on? Because he argues we all have the same what he calls the apparatuses of experiences. We all have eyes, we all have ears, and our human ears and eyes imposes a certain structure on reality that we can then use to constitute science and to constitute ethics. On scientific principles, indubitable principles that we can all agree that are universal. So Kant is technically a universalist when it comes to science and ethics. So whereas the empiricists will argue, and one of my favorite philosophers in grad school was, oh God, my favorite philosopher, talking too fast. It's Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell wrote a book called Why I'm Not a Christian. In that book he says, and he's an empiricist, he's a strict empiricist. I don't know if you know these people, there are still some strict empiricists and strict rationalists. These people who are strict empiricists, materialists, they argue outside, and this is a quote from Bertrand Russell in his book Why I'm Not a Christian. He argues that outside of human desire there are no moral principles. So the empiricists do not believe there are any ethical principles that we can organize to form society. All ethical principles are a matter of emotion, how you feel, what's good or bad. The utilitarians will build off the empiricists as well. The greatest good for the greatest number of people. The rationalists, on the other hand, argue, yes, you can reason morality. There are ethical norms by which we can recursively reorganize and reproduce our existence in the world. Kant will agree with the rationalists. He will give us what is called the ontological ethics. Kant just takes the golden mean, do unto others like you would have them do unto you. And turn it into his maxim, act as though whatever you do, you can turn or make a universal truth. So for example, what he means is, let's assume I wanted to steal this water bottle. Kant is saying, through his maxim, I have to act as though if I am to steal this water bottle, that means anybody else should be able to do the same thing. So I must say, if I'm able to do it, that means everyone else should do it. However, if I feel this is my water bottle and I don't want people to steal it, then I should not steal the water bottle because I wouldn't want everybody else to steal the bottle. So this is how he gets to universals. The reason universal truth. So, even though for Kant, the universal truth, they're not universal by meaning that there's a God that in the Euthyphro, Plato has Socrates asking Euthyphro, is something good because God says it's good, or is it good then God says it's good? You see the difference? Follow? Because if something is good and then God says it's good, that means values presupposes God. So God is subject to the values that presuppose him. However, if God is the one uttering the values, then that implies that God is the one that... So, in Kantian deontological ethics, Kant is saying it's not that thou shalt not steal is a universal truth that God ordained. No, it's a product of reason. It's a product of rationality. It's a human construction. It's a product of me saying, I would not want this done to me, so I won't do it unto others. When Noam Chomsky critiques American foreign policy, when Noam Chomsky critiques American injustice, he's doing it from a deontological ethic. America would not want this done to it, so why does it do it to other people? Why isn't America bombs other people? Do we want ourselves being bombed? We're killing men, women, and children in Syria. Why? Would we want the Syrians to kill men, women, and children here? So when Chomsky makes those arguments, what we call a deontological ethic position. Famous empiricists you may know, Christopher Hitchens, God bless the dead, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, they argue there's no human morality. We should use reason. Power determines everything. Might makes right. From an empirical perspective, because there's no human morality. I say what, if I have power, I say what ought to be. The Enlightenment Project is an attempt, believe it or not, to constitute human society based on reason and rationality. What we call classical liberalism. The intent is, the belief is, there are certain human rights, inalienable rights that we all have that ought to be respected by everyone. So the intent is on equality and human nature, protecting human nature and human rights and equality. And it comes out of human reason, even though the founding fathers, they're deists, but even though many of them make references to God, many of them were atheists. This is the logical conclusion of these two philosophical schools embodied in Kantian deontological ethics. So it's either we hold on to a deontological ethical perspective, or we say, you know what? Because the logical conclusion, what's the logical conclusion? Since these aren't technically universals, we just reason, we deduce them from reason, from our own human nature. Technically, it goes back to the empiricists. There are no, outside of human desire, there are no moral standards, so why should I respect these moral standards? Let's call it what it is, power and power relations. Now the problem that we're encountering contemporarily is that classical liberalism, don't worry, I'll clean it up. Classical liberalism is encountering a demise or a contradiction in classical liberalism. And this is where we get to contemporary social justice and ethics. In 1791, during the Haitian Revolution begins August 21, 1791. How many know about the Haitian Revolution? How many people know about the Haitian Revolution? Just one? Two? Anyway, there were three groups fighting for the island of Saint-Domingue. The whites, the mulattoes, the whites, the mulattoes, the affranchis. Affranchis were free blacks and mulattoes, and the majority of the Africans on the island. When the Haitian Revolution begins in 1791, 67% of the enslaved people were directly from Africa. Directly from Africa. The whites want to maintain slavery under what was emerging at the time, classical liberal democracy, under this notion of free trade, because basically they were a protectorate of the French government. The mulatto elites, they were slave owners. They had slaves. They owned about 25% to 33% of the plantations on the island. As well, believe it or not, even the free blacks were slave owners. In fact, when Toussaint, who took over the revolution, declared independence, well, he doesn't declare independence, he constitutes the Constitution in 1801, he actually wrote the slave trade into the Constitution. He said Haiti would be a country, a plantation economy with free labor, but we would continue the African slave trade. And then you have the African majority who want no part of the plantation economy. Those four groups are fighting against each other. So on the one hand, you have the whites who want to maintain this notion that they are free men who could own property, and the Africans were property, and they could own land and make money, come to Saint-Domingue and make money. The mulatto elites, who were the offsprings of whites and blacks, they believe in this whole Enlightenment philosophy as well, of free trade, plantation owning, free men who can own women, who can do whatever they want to. This whole notion of human rights to do what you please as men, land-owning plantation owners who own slaves. The free blacks also buy into that concept. And then you have the Africans who want absolutely nothing to do with this concept of free trade. So how do you constitute social justice within that social milieu? What does social justice look like? Is it on the side of the white landowners? Is it on the side of the Africans? Who wins out? Essentially, it is the mulatto elites and the free blacks and the Africans who win out. Toussaint Louverture, who would take over the revolution, he kicks out the whites. He allows them to come back as plantation owners, but he kicks out the lieutenant governor. So he wants to introduce the plantation economy, but now he wants to expand those who have wealth in the economy. Wealth should not only be limited to white men, but it should also include mulattoes and free blacks. He has a problem because the mulatto elites are racist. They hate Africans, even though they're half black, but they hate Africans. They want the Africans. Do you think the Africans would side with Louverture? Of course not. They don't want anything to do with the plantation economy. So they fight against Toussaint's ability to expand this notion of who is free, who has the right to own land, and who is equal. Under France, it was only whites. The mulattoes, although not by law, but their fathers would simply leave land to them. So Toussaint wants to expand who should own land. So he says, well, my black generals should own land, but we will also keep slaves. The Africans say, no, this resembles slavery. We don't want anything to do with this. So because the mulattoes wanted to maintain slavery at the expense of both the black generals and the Africans. There's a war that breaks out between the mulattoes and the free blacks. So Toussaint gets rid of the mulattoes. It's called the War of Knives. He sends his general, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, to kill all the mulattoes in the south of the country. So the mulattoes flee and go to France. When Napoleon finishes war with the British, he sends the mulattoes to reclaim the island for France. So he sends who would become the first president of the Republic, Alexander Pétion. He sends back a guy by the name André Rigaud to take the island for France. War breaks out. He sends his general, General Leclerc, to take the island along with the mulatto elites who had escaped. War breaks out. The Africans continue to fight for total liberation and freedom. The black generals concede and they join the French army. So now there is a fight between the mulattoes, free blacks, whites, against the African majority. The African majority were winning. So then the black generals under Jean-Jacques Dessalines makes a pact with the Africans. They say, hey, let's kick out all the whites, then we could take over the island, and all of us would have land, plantations, and we could split the land between us. So on January 1st, 1804, Leclerc loses and Haiti is declared the first black republic in the Western, the second republic in the Western Hemisphere, and the first black republic. America being the first republic in the hemisphere. The problem then becomes, how do we constitute a just society in a global capitalist world system? That is what the Black Republic was facing. The Africans wanted no part of the plantation economy because in their mind they were not free and they were not equal to everyone in the society. The mulattoes and free blacks say, well, no, we will maintain the plantation economy, but in the same breath, we will have free labor. So Haiti has been in civil war since January 1st, 1804, over that particular issue. How do you constitute a just society in a capitalist world system? The Africans developed something. They called it the Lakou system. In the Lakou system, everyone is free without distinction. Everyone gets land. Everyone is free without distinction. You could live as you... They would establish what is called a libertarian communist system, the Lakou system. Everyone is free to do as you please, so long as you don't harm another, libertarianism, but we share what we produce on the land. The mulatto elites and the black generals of the island would try to reconstitute the plantation economy under something that is called the Corvair system. So, the Africans say everyone is free on the island without distinctions. In fact, in Haiti's 1805 Constitution, Dessalines said everyone who steps foot on the island of Haiti is considered black. No mulattoes, nothing. The Africans, they call them Bosals, by the way. The Africans on the island were called Bosals. So they said mulatto, black, white. There were a few whites who were, Dessalines allowed the Polish soldiers who fought with him against the French, he did allow them to remain on the island. So the Africans, the Bosals, majority of them, 67% were from the Congo. They say everyone, regardless, it's so funny, in Haiti is one of the few places in the Caribbean where homosexuality was allowed. Because in the lacus, you can practice homosexuality. You're free to be and do whatever you want to without distinction. Whether it's gender, class, it doesn't matter. The mulattoes and the free blacks, because they were educated, in many of them in France, they adopted a classic liberal understanding of freedom, which included just free men, property-owning free men. They were equal. Women weren't included. Homosexuals weren't included. And the Africans weren't included. In fact, in 1806, October 17, which we celebrate as the assassination of the founding father of Haiti, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, once he was assassinated by the mulatto first president of the country, Alexander Pétion, many of the Africans went into the provinces and the mountains, and they established a libertarian communist society in the provinces via what's called the Lacu system. Now you're going to say, Dr. Mocombe, you took us all through this. How does that apply contemporarily? Because contemporarily, we're having this same issue. The Africans included everyone. Everyone gets land. Everyone produces what they want on their land, feed themselves, do whatever. No, the mulatto elites, they were like, no, only educated, building on this classic liberal model, only educated, free men who own property, which they did, are free. This is how do you constitute a just society in a capitalist system that differentiates based on class, race, gender, ethnicity, and sexual orientation. We're facing the same issue today. And the constitution of postmodern global society, the fight is between two things. What does a just society look like contemporarily? On the left, we'll call it left and right for political purposes. Just like during the Haitian Revolution, on the left, you have what we call identity politics. What does identity politics say? Well, since the dawn of the Enlightenment and the dawn of Western civilization, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men have been the ruling class. They've owned property. They've determined how the laws, how we ought to recursively reorganize and reproduce our lives. Now, what has been the fight of blacks? What have been the purposive rationality of women? Is it to join white Anglo-Saxon, integrate within white Anglo-Saxon Protestant hegemony? Or are they fighting against the hegemony of white Anglo-Saxon Protestant society? Liberal feminists say, you all remember the whole fight with Serena Williams, right? She breaks her racket. She said, other men do this and they don't get singled out. So what? She wants to be treated like other men, right? Or is she trying to fight against patriarchy? What would win out are liberal feminists, liberal blacks. What was the purpose of the black civil rights movement? To integrate into Western society? Or was the black civil rights movement a counter-hegemonic force against white liberal society? What was Martin Luther King arguing for? So what would come out of the left is liberal integration. I won't go into the variants because I know we're short on time, but so we have liberal feminism, liberal black civil rights movement, liberalism among blacks to integrate. So the whole notion is we may have 100 white billionaires, half of them have to be black, gay, white, right? Remember, on the right, this whole notion, let's use the Trumpian notion is, no, we don't care about your identity. The whole emphasis is on these universal principles we call human rights and equality. Race, gender, class are real objective structures within the class structure. Real objective conditions within the class structure. You all understand what I just said? Real object meaning white Anglo-Saxon Protestant men constituted American society by marginalizing women, gays, blacks, but there are objective structures within the larger class structure. In that same fight, the Haitians say, no, we don't care about identity politics, we just care about human rights and equality. This is the classic liberal model, human rights and equality. What happens when you introduce identity politics? You're saying I must be treated I must be integrated based on my gender, my age, my race, etc. So you reify these positions as though they're, well, I'll use the term, sorry, sui generis. I'll explain to it. But it's the same struggle. Are there universal principles by which we ought to integrate society, or should my what's called intersectionality the various divisions by which I am marginalized, should we reify them and just simply integrate people into not a society that is constituted based on human rights and equality, but a society that is structurally differentiating us along class lines? The Haitians said no. Under this understanding of the Lacou system, there should be no structural differentiation whatsoever. Libertarian communism under the Lacou system. The mulatto elites, the free blacks say no. We're property-owning men. We have power. We should have more power in the society. Contemporarily, what is the fight? The contemporary fight, Hillary Clinton threw her hat in the race, did not challenge many of the things that Donald Trump, who assumed the position of a left-wing radical, like Bernie Sanders, she threw her hat in the position thinking that her identity would put her over the top. Her gender identity would put her over the top. Integration via identity politics within a society that structurally differentiates us against class. Is that social justice in that society? Haiti, to quote our president, has been a piece of shit country because the mulatto elites and the blacks have been fighting since 1804. How do we integrate within capitalism? Not how do we destroy capitalism to prevent any sort of structural differentiation. In my initial class, I told my students that all societies structurally differentiate. But should we structurally differentiate along class lines? Because in 1993, Francis Fukuyama wrote a book called The End of History and The Last Man Standing. In that book, he argues Western liberal democracy and free capitalism is the last ideological model left on this earth. Communism has failed. Socialism has failed. So the Western liberal democratic free capitalist model is the last just model left. There's no more need for ideological fighting about how should we constitute society. Forget the empiricists. Forget the rationalists. Forget Immanuel Kant. We've come to deduce through reason that liberal democracy and free state capitalism, even though it structurally differentiates us along class line, is the best model that we can deduce as human beings. And it is within that model we need to find social justice. I think outside with my African brothers with the libertarian communism. Most of my writing is on that particular topic. How do we deduce a just ethical society in which we are no longer structurally differentiated along class line? Should we adopt what's on the left? No, forget that. Let's just integrate all of the groups we've marginalized since the Constitution of the Enlightenment. How many people favor that? Let's bring in a few gays to be millionaires and billionaires, a few blacks to be billionaires at the expense of the majority. Does that make sense? I don't think so. A female billionaire is no better than a male billionaire. A black billionaire is no better than a white billionaire. So why should I accept the identity? I'm going to hold on to the universal human rights and equality. Let's attack liberal democratic capitalism as a system by which we organize and recursively reproduce. And if we don't, we die anyway. I wrote a book titled Liberal Bourgeois Protestantism, in which I argue, yes, I agree with Fukuyama. Because we've been interpolated in the system, I don't see an out. The only thing left that will make us change is Mother Nature, climate change. Because this whole notion of economic growth, we can no longer hold on to that. Now, there's a limit to growth. Either we change or Mother Nature kills us. But the problem is, what's the ideological solution by which what's the alternative? And I'm going to leave it at that. Somebody's going to give me some water, right? You on? I'll get this all. Well,
there was somebody, Anthony Christoph.
Christoph, yes.
Right, and I just don't know the role that you had in that Haitian Revolution.
Okay, when the revolution commences, the mulattoes are trying to get the Africans to fight with them. Remember, there are basically three land-owning classes on the island: the whites, the mulattoes, and free blacks. So many of the free blacks were slave drivers. So when the revolution commences, Toussaint, Henri Christophe, Dessalines, they're free blacks. Toussaint had purchased his freedom from his master. So he's not a mulatto. No. Toussaint assumes the leadership of the revolution. He was fighting with the Spanish against the French, and when he realized the French were winning, he switched sides, and he assumed the leadership of the revolution. Following his capture, and he would die in France in 1803, the understanding by Bonaparte was if they captured Toussaint, then the revolution would die out. They didn't realize Toussaint wasn't the revolution, it was the Africans. And the reason why the Haitian Revolution was successful is because by 1791, the majority of the Africans were from the Congo. They were used to fighting. So they were warriors, essentially. So Toussaint would be captured by Leclerc in 1802 and shipped off to France. Christophe Dessalines and some others they don't mention. Sanssouci Makaya. Makaya and Sanssouci are Congolese warriors. They are the leaders of the Congolese troops who were fighting against the French. They would assume the leadership of the revolution. Dessalines would then go and meet with Alexander Pétion, who represented the mulatto elites on the island. He would make a deal. We call it the Treaty of Acayet. He would tell Pétion, if we get rid of the French, you and I, meaning the mulatto elites and the free blacks, can constitute Haiti as we see fit. So they agreed. But Alexander Pétion would backstab Dessalines and assassinate him October 17, 1806. Christophe, once they assassinated him, the country became split into two. The southern part where the mulatto elites lived, that included Port-au-Prince, Jacmel, and the south of the island. And the north was under the leadership of Henri Christophe. And he would kill himself in 1821. And then Pétion would unite the island under mulatto rule. So Haiti's constitution has been this struggle between the mulatto elites and the black majority since 1806, since 1801.
And on what side was Louverture?
Louverture? Well, Louverture is really complicated, brother. He attempted to bring one, because many of the white plantation owners had left the island when the revolution commences. So to bring about peace on the island, he allowed the white plantation owners to come back, which is why now he had to deal with the mulatto elites who hated the whites because they couldn't become doctors or practice certain professions. And then the Africans who were against Toussaint's Corvair system. The Corvair system is nothing but the plantation economy with wage labor. He said, instead of working for free, we'll pay you. But it's still slavery. That's how the Africans saw it. It's still slavery. Go ahead, man.
You mentioned the name Fukuyama?
Francis, yes.
Yes.
He wrote, go ahead, ask your question.
How much is appears and how he fit into this topic?
He wrote a book in 1993 titled The End of History and the Last Man Standing, in which he argues the Western liberal democratic model with free capitalism is the last ideological model evolved by reason. Now he's critiquing another philosopher by the name of Alexander Kojev, who also has this critique. The end of history is Hegel's term. Hegel is a German philosopher who wrote the Phenomenology of Right. He's Marx's professor. He's an idealist. He's a rationalist. Marx is a materialist. And he wrote The End of History, in which he argues that the logical the universals that we can deduce from reason will become embodied in the Prussian state, which is a semblance of liberal democratic capitalism, and that will be the end of history. There will be no need for ideological battles anymore, because reason will give us universals by which we ought to organize society and